Well, it certainly has become an old line for Donald Trump, but one he has leaned on a lot this week, particularly after the debate. Trump saying the establishment is out to get him, and chief among them what he calls the corrupt and biased American media.
The corrupt media is trying to do everything in their power to stop our movement, believe me.
Since I joined this campaign, I've been astonished at the level of negative coverage of my running mate and the scant coverage of an avalanche of scandals and corruption coming out of the campaign of Hillary Clinton.
That you will absolutely accept the result of this election.
I will look at it at the time. I'm not looking at anything now. I'll look at it at the time. What I've seen is so bad. First of all, the media is so dishonest and so corrupt, and the pile-on is so amazing. The New York Times actually wrote an article about it that they don't even care. It's so dishonest.
Now, that last bit was part of Trump's response during the last debate this week to a question about his willingness to accept the results of the upcoming American election. And we're going to take a closer look now at the veracity of Trump's claims and what Trump's constant beating of the drum means for American journalism. Dave Leventhal is a senior political reporter for the Center for Public Integrity. Angelo Caruson is the executive vice president of Media Matters for America. And Angelo, we should say, while that is your current position, full disclosure, you used to work for the Democratic Party, but that was in the past. Our two guests, we should say, are joining us from Washington. So let's begin with the basic premise here. And Angelo, I'm going to start with you. Is the media biased?
So I think and that question isn't even a simple question, because I think what Donald Trump is saying is that both the media is biased against him and the media is just structurally biased. So I'm going to take the thing about their treatment of him and put that to the side for a minute, because the cries of liberal media are something that we often hear from critics, especially conservative critics in the States. And if you look at this both quantitatively and qualitatively, it simply doesn't stand. So from a quantitative perspective, Media Matters has done a study of all of the op-eds and columns in the United States over the course of a year. 60% of all of the newspapers in the country printed more conservative columns than they did from progressives or neutral columns. Only 20% of the papers in the country printed columns where progressives outnumbered it, and 20% had a perfect balance between the two. If you look at the Sunday shows, which are the single most, say, politically influential programs in the States, they have every advantage to them when it comes to booking guests. They're only once a week. They have an entire week to prepare their topics. We do a study every year that looks at the totality of the guests there, and every year the guests are overwhelmingly white, conservative, and male. 28% of all guests on the Sunday shows are white, conservative, and male. And in fact, if you look at all of the guests, conservatives outnumber progressives by about 12%. Conservatives make up about 40% of all of the guests. Progressives range anywhere between 26 and 28% of all of the guests. And so and those are just a couple of data points. We could go down the list there. So from a quantitative perspective, that's not the case. And if you look at just Donald Trump himself, the media was Donald Trump's biggest supporter during the primaries and during especially during the early parts of the general election. And by supporter, what I really mean is in the form of the free airtime that they gave him. They gave him over $2 billion worth of free coverage during the primaries, and it completely eclipsed all of his primary opponents. I mean, if you add up all 16 other of his opponents at the time, it still didn't even come close to the earned media coverage. And when I say free airtime, it wasn't that they were giving him airtime like in the form of interviews and challenging him and forcing him to confront the truth. They were just running his rallies raw, like as if you would stream them without any real coverage.
Well, let me jump in there, because as you say, quantitatively, you can see, or based on your numbers, that the conservative spokespeople are seen more often. And as you say, Donald Trump certainly got a lot of coverage during the primaries. But Dave, I want to bring you in here because I do also question the issue of personal biases seeping through what we see through media, because you wrote an article about the amount of money journalists contribute to both campaigns.
We did, and we found that among journalists who are identifiable, that we were able to find listed in federal records from both the Trump and the Clinton campaigns, that those group of journalists who had made donations, and we're talking about 400 or so people here, the vast majority of them and the vast majority of the money that had gone toward one candidate or another went the way of Hillary Clinton. So on one hand, you have an example, and we were able to show that, yes, journalists who are putting their money on the line, journalists who are willing to have their name on a public document and make a political contribution, they're absolutely leaning the way of Hillary Clinton. But the other side of that story, of course, is that most journalists don't give political contributions. So the Trump campaign kind of held us up as a... Yeah.
Which I have to jump in, because that did strike me as odd. I can't imagine a Canadian journalist covering politics in this country making any type of political donation. When you talk about journalists, are you talking about political journalists in the United States?
We're talking about journalists broadly. So some examples, we did find people who had coverage areas that did absolutely delve into politics. We didn't find people who were on the campaign trail with Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. But this speaks more to a larger issue about ethics in journalism, ethics in the media. And long, for many, many decades, there's been a taboo, or for that matter, up to today, many bans in newsrooms of journalists of any sort, whether you're covering politics or you're covering the arts, whether you're covering baseball, saying just simply, no, you can't make a political contribution because perception in the minds of many newsroom leaders is reality for people. So if people in their newsrooms, regardless of what they do, are making a political contribution, the concern is that that's going to paint the whole news organization, or even the industry writ large, is something that is leaning one way or another. It's very difficult to talk about the media as some sort of monolith and leaning left or leaning right. There are literally tens of thousands of people who, again, broadly speaking, could be defined as journalists who write, who produce, who talk on television or the radio, who write news articles
and I need
online.
I need to jump in here again, because just to put it out there for those who are watching our network, we have very clear guidelines that essentially forbid that type of political contribution from journalists with the CBC. But that said, and Angela, I'm going to bring you in here again. I wonder about the precedent it sets, because as is being suggested here, there might be some discussion about ethics to be had, but the overall message that the media cannot be trusted, how dangerous is that as a message?
I think that's a deeply dangerous problem. In a democracy, the media is an important part of the decision-making process for the public, right? They have to put information into the ecosystem for people to make decisions about policies, about their representatives, about how to order their lives. And so if you're told that the entire system is somehow in disrepute and is not worth listening to, it shouldn't be trusted, not only does that have a disorientation around how individuals order their lives, but it has broader implications, because it allows for misinformation and extremism and other forms of intentional deceit to fill the void there. Because Donald Trump isn't just, and I think I'm using his as an example here because that's the subject matter, but when he attacks the media, that's not where he leaves it. He doesn't just say that these individual media outlets or these parts of the media should not be trusted. He then directs his supporters and those following him to alternative media outlets that he says should be trusted. And those outlets are, by and away, purely ideological and have some of the most disreputable reputations when it comes to the content of what they're putting out there,
and
like
Dave,
Alex Jones, for example.
Yeah, and Dave, let me bring you in again, because you couple that idea that the media can't be trusted with the idea that an election is rigged. That seems incredibly dangerous in such a polarized society as is the United States when it comes to politics.
I think on both sides of the spectrum, you're going to have criticism of the media. This is nothing new in a presidential race, for sure, and you can cite examples going back every presidential election for decades. What's different about this election, particularly in 2016, is that the media itself has largely become the story on the Hillary Clinton side of the equation. She froze out her own press corps for months and months at a time, not conducting formalized press conferences. On the Trump side, of course, the storyline has largely been Donald Trump banning of certain news organizations from his rallies, Donald Trump singling out individual reporters as saying that they're corrupt and biased and horrible and terrible and every term that you could possibly use. But Donald Trump has also had a very complicated relationship with the press. For example, he sat down for numerous on-air interviews. He's, in fact, spoke with the author of a book that the Washington Post wrote, Michael Kranish, and he said, Donald Trump did 20 hours of on-the-record or other interviews with us for this book. That's a level of access that Donald Trump has provided that Hillary Clinton has not. So partisans on both sides will always be pointed to the other side as being inaccurate and being biased, and in the other camp.
Sorry to interrupt you, because we're running out of time here, but Angela, I need to bring you in here, because you know about what it's like to be intimidated by Donald Trump as a journalist.
That's exactly right, and I do have a bit of a concern. I think it's true. Yes, there are criticism of the media. That's nothing new. There's never been the linchpin of a campaign before in the way that it is with Donald Trump. And beyond that, I'm a little concerned about conflating criticisms of the media and whatever Hillary Clinton has acted toward the media with Donald Trump, there is a fundamental difference there, and that gets into the chilling effect. He has reporters and publications on his blacklist. He doesn't let media entities into certain rallies because they're on a blacklist. That is entirely unprecedented. And beyond that, it's the chilling effect from his threats of litigation. He's been very explicit about getting out there and saying that he will sue companies and news outlets that are already struggling if he doesn't like their coverage, and that the intention is to punish them. That does have a chilling effect on the coverage, and I know that all too well. When Donald Trump threatened to sue me for $25 million for some advocacy that I was doing that he did not like, he threatened to sue me, and then it took months to find coverage. It did to find a legal representation, and it affected my actions because I obviously have significantly less resources than Donald Trump, and the idea that I could spend years embroiled in a sort of a frivolous litigation solely as a form of retribution is a very legitimate concern and consideration, and that's now something that many members of the media have to deal with if they're able to get into his rallies, given that he does in fact have official blacklists. And I think that's the real concern here. I think it's fair to say that there is elements that's always been the way, but this is completely unprecedented, and we shouldn't allow a false equivalency like that to exist.
And we should jump in as well, Angelo, just to point out the reason why Donald Trump was having issue with you was because you're pointing out his birther movement, which is this racist idea that President Obama couldn't possibly have been born in the United States. That said, as we talk about all this, let's pull it all together. How does the media have to change how it covers political events going forward as a result of what has been learned in this U.S. election cycle with Donald Trump?
Well, I think you have to have an ironclad backbone when you're working in, for us, investigative journalism or other news organizations in more day-to-day coverage. Donald Trump, of course, has threatened lots of people with lots of different things, lawsuits. I can think of one, the New York Times recently, where he threatened to sue them, and the New York Times effectively said, well, bring it on. We're going to go and we're going to do the work that we possibly can. You got to remind people all the time that, look, these people are running for the leadership of the United States of America, is leader of the free world. And as a result, they put themselves out there for scrutiny in a way that no other person really on earth is going to get or perhaps deserve. So journalists, it's their job to dig into the backgrounds of candidates. It's their job to investigate every aspect of their business deals, even their personal affairs. And it's something that for a lot of people may seem unseemly. But again, look at who you're putting in the White House. You're putting somebody who's going to lead a nation. And there's a very, very high standard, journalistically speaking, for journalists to do their jobs and make sure that those folks are being held accountable.
Angelo?
I think going forward, they just have to be very mindful of the real structural things that are happening in the landscape and all the shifts that are taking place, and to not enable misinformation by giving special privileges to one candidate over another, and beyond that, to always force candidates to confront the truth. And I think that's largely what happened in the case with Donald Trump. For a very long time, they didn't. It was a great way to get ratings and attention, and it was easy coverage, but they weren't rigorously forcing him to confront the truth the way they traditionally have in the past, and the way that everybody expects and really needs them to. And I think that's just something that they need to do going forward, is just get back to those basic principles.
Gentlemen, I could go on much longer, but my producers want me to wrap. So thank you very much for this. I enjoyed the conversation very much. Dave Leventhal with the Center for Public Integrity, Angelo Caruson with Media Matters for America, both of them speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Guys, thank you very much.